Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 85th call of the Amazon Investor Coalition. This is a weekly call and podcast series dedicated to advancing forest-friendly economic development and the rule of law across the Amazon region of South America. This week, we are featuring the work of Carolina Muniz from the Oak Foundation Brazil program. She's been spending a lot of time developing flexible philanthropy opportunities and programs, and the Amazon is especially in need of such flexibility. In the email outreach, you guys saw one example. Many funders like to see multiple years of audited financial statements of their future potential grantees, and a lot of forest populations don't have such institutional infrastructure. So how do we get around it? And there's a lot more at play as well. Carolina has a presentation, and she also has some questions and exercises for us as a community. Carolina, the microphone is yours.
Hi, everyone. These won't be physical exercises. You don't need to worry. No need to put on any sneakers, any sports outfits. We can all sit comfortably in our laptops and screens. It's nice to be with you all wherever you are. I'm Carolina. I am currently the program officer for Brazil at Oak Foundation. I work from Sao Paulo. This is where I'm talking to you from. Before I joined Oak a year ago, I spent many years trying to remix and hack and change the ways that we do philanthropy and funding so we can maybe reach those that currently are unreachable for many donors and investors. So today, let me share my screen with you all. There's a lot that I want to hear from you all, and there's also some stories that I want to tell. Essentially, what are we talking about today? This is what we are talking about. For me, at least, I like to call it fund support that is timely, flexible, accessible, and decentralized. Please note that I'm not using the word funding, I'm using the word support, and then I'll talk a little bit about that later. By timely, I mean support that is there when communities, movements, groups, activists need it the most, that can reach them at the same pace of emergencies and opportunities, and not usually in a belated fashion, which is often what happens. Flexible, meaning that we can change the course of the use of that support. We can take curves in our journey. We can go off the beaten path. So we can change that, we can work in a perception and response way rather than predict and control. By accessible, well, that's very literal. I mean, funding that is accessible, for instance, for those who do not have many years of audited financial statements and other many requirements. And decentralized, which is probably my favorite word here, but funding and support that has many centers, that can be found in many different places, that can be accessed in many different ways at many different points in time, in many different regions from many different sources. The more words many we can fit into this description, the more groups we're actually able to reach, and the more ecosystem-based our work becomes. And I always use the word support rather than funding, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, but just as an intro, because when I speak of funding, I never see it as a single component. I always add in the capacity building component, the network building component, the movement building component, and taking responsibility for these different components with, and not just for, the communities that we're supporting has always made its way into the core of my work, and the lessons, good and bad, of that I want to share with you as well today. You'll see an image here of a finger in water. This is for me a symbol of what I have been witnessing and trying to do as well in my work. When we place a finger in the water, we're only touching one spot, but we see the effect all around, right? So the water moves with a single touch of our single finger. And what happens? So many people, when we're talking about reaching small groups, small communities, local movements, non-registered collectives. People often ask, well, how can we reach all of those? And how can all of those individual groups and communities actually make a systemic form of change? Well, what if we look at this picture? Well, many drops in the water, all next to each other. What if we look at this picture, an ocean filled with drops in the water, all trickling down, all moving each other, all working in a systemic way, changing a whole landscape. So we don't have to, it's a false dilemma to struggle with the issue of the general and the particular. We should think of communities and movements and groups as living beings that, when strengthened, actually are able to overflow into their neighboring communities, their neighboring alliances, their neighboring movements. So this is the picture that I have in my mind when I think of supporting small groups, local movements, the grassroots, which is a word that can mean many things for many different people. But for us, essentially, I'll use it today to mean these people that I'm talking about, the non-registered movements and collectives, the communities, the neighborhood associations, the community leaders, the local movements. Why? There are so many reasons why. Essentially, I could fill this hour with stories that I have witnessed about how small amounts of funding and small scale support to groups that in our eyes are considered small makes big change. I chose to leave this page blank because literally we could overflow it with reasons. There is reasons related to equity. So why isn't money from investment and philanthropy reaching the most vulnerable communities, reaching those that need it most, reaching the low income communities, those that are struggling to survive? And that is the reason why they're entering different modes of production or activism or struggle, so be it. Why isn't money reaching these people at scale? So there is a matter of equity. There is a matter of efficacy, effectiveness. So people who are close to the problem, they tend to be engaged for longer periods of time in changing that problem, in creating change, because they are impacted firsthand. And it's become sort of cliche that people who are impacted by an issue know the solutions better than others. We use this kind of knowledge, this kind of sentence a lot these days. Well, people who are closer to the problem, they are the ones who have the solutions. They are the ones who know how to go about a problem. But we have to look beyond a cliche. It is true, there are forms of knowledge there that would become mainstream, but they don't, because these are communities who are at the margins. Were they at the center of production of knowledge, of academia, of philanthropy, the lessons that they have to share would easily become the center of our practices. But it does not reach our ears and our eyes because they don't have the means to express, the legitimate means to express what it is that they think and know and do and have done for many years, if not centuries. So there are many reasons why. But I want to start with a story before going into the workings of these things. Can you still see my screen, the presentation? Okay, because it just blanked here for a minute. So a story to you all from this morning, just this morning, today.
We're looking, Carolina, we're looking just at the word why, but we're looking at it.
Right. Okay, that's right. So we're still in the same place. Thank you. So just this morning, I was in a 40-minute call with a community leader from a favela, a slum in the center of Recife and the northeast of Brazil. She is a Black woman in her mid-30s. She is the head of a single parent household. And she happens to be the leader of a community movement that is fighting to stay where they are. So this is a favela in an area that is considered prime location for developers in Recife. So there's a lot of harassment from the real estate market, lots of harassment from the municipality to get them out of there, essentially. And this woman, she has been leading the struggle for many years for this community to remain where they are and live in dignity. So we went on that call because she had written to me to ask for help in figuring out some pathways for her own sustainability, mom of two, and for the community struggle. And at one point in the conversation today, she told me, well, you know, the issue is I don't fit into these NGOs. I don't have a degree. I'm a single mom, and my time is always consumed by the community's needs. And the organizations, you know, these NGOs, these CSOs, they don't really, even those that consider hiring me, they don't really trust me. They don't trust my expertise or my work. And during the call, she had to leave twice because there were people in the community knocking on her window and asking her to come outside to figure out some issue that had come about, something that needed her attention. And then as she came back to the conversation, she continued and said, you know, I also don't fit into the regular job market because if I get a job at the mall, like just, you know, last year I got a job at the mall, for instance, and I didn't have time for the community anymore. I didn't have time for our activism. And then the tears started to fill her eyes slowly, but towards the end, she took a deep breath and she said, and you know what? I don't want to fit in. We don't want to fit in because once we fit into these worlds, it becomes business as usual. And we want to keep the vitality, the uniqueness of our movement. It's a non-registered, autonomous movement. It's a community movement. And this shouldn't mean that we don't have our needs met as a community, as people, as families, as community activists. We should be able to have our needs met and also continue to be exactly what it is that we are right now. So my intention to be with you all today, here and now, is to talk about pathways to nourish those that don't fit in. So in my pathway so far, I have tried to find pathways for sustainability with and for different movements who are currently considered unfundable for many reasons. I have done this with the movement of sex workers in the southeast of Brazil. I have done this with organizations, emerging organizations, working to increase representation of Black, LGBTI, Indigenous people in political power in Brazil. I have done this with urban movements and collectives in the wake of the June 2013 protests, the struggles against the negative impacts of the World Cup, of the big sports events, the Olympics. I have done this with small local climate movements, with Indigenous nations, with working class activists in peripheries of big Brazilian cities. But this is not new. This is really important. So practices to try and make funding more accessible, decentralized, timely, and flexible, they have existed for a long time. Probably for decades. I was speaking to Amalia earlier, and we were talking about experiences that began in the 1980s. Even Fundo Casa, that is present here, came about in the mid-1990s. So this is not new. And when I sent you all a set of links that you probably received from Jonah, I purposely included some old but gold links from the early 2000s, 2006, you know, programs, reports, saying the same things that I'm saying to you all today, which is we should make funding more accessible. We should be reaching the grassroots communities. We should give communities more self-governance in the way that they use these funds. We should respect their knowledge. And when we do it, it has worked. So this is not new. And I'm not presenting to you anything that I have learned on my own, but rather that I have learned by listening to and watching and also practicing and replicating the experiences of many organizations and people and leaders for decades. So how? These are little snippets of some of the links that I sent you all. So for instance, oh my God, okay. slippery laptop. So how? We should start to simplify and streamline the paperwork, the bureaucracy that we require from grantees, from partners, from those we support. This is not me, I'm not saying this. This is the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, and you can find the same kind of lesson in literally hundreds of reports out there. We should offer support beyond the paycheck. There are probably organizations here in this call that do this. They offer capacity building, capacity strengthening to those who they fund. They try and keep long-term relationships with those that they fund. They look at both group development and individual leadership development. There are many, many ways that we can do this. The Wallace Foundation in 2006 was telling us, well, we should seek sustainable impact beyond our own grantees. Of course, we should choose grantees and partners because of their own qualities, but we also should think about their position in an ecosystem, right? The finger in the water, how does that trickle down into an environment, an ecosystem of organizations, of players? We should take a long view. We should not only think of immediate results. We should think years from now, what could be the predictable and unpredictable effects of the work that we do? I would also add, let me actually move on to this slide before I continue. I would also add other ways to do this. So we should also always examine inside of us and look at the assumptions that we have that constantly force us to try and do things at scale, to try and multiply, to try and go for the big programs, the big projects, the big organizations, the big impact. What if we try to think of things in a different way? So we should always examine the silent assumptions in us that usually tell us that small things are ineffective, that unique things are ineffective, that things that are decentralized are ineffective, and the things that are centralized and big and scaled up are always more effective. We always should embrace trust and relinquish control. I can never say this enough. It is not as easy as it looks, but it can be done. We should always accept the complexity of change, and complexity is an important word for me. When I use it, I mean two things. I mean that usually in complex environments, cause and effect doesn't usually align. So it's not like, well, let's do A and then B will happen. Not in social realities. Well, we're talking about lived realities where cause and effect is usually not aligned. Things can happen for a set of different reasons, and it's hard to attribute causality to one single thing. So we should always take that into mind when we're thinking about impact, for instance, and we're trying to predict and control what we want to achieve by doing something. Nonlinear transformation. So the nonlinear transformation in me salutes the nonlinear transformation in you. We can think of ourselves, our own life stories, how nonlinear they have been, how much we have gone forward and backwards. And with communities and change makers, it's more or less the same. We cannot demand of them that they continue doing change on a linear basis and that things are always getting better and better and better. So we should be able to adapt and relax in the face of adversity, of change, of setbacks, of things that are unforeseen. And the thing is, with communities, these things are just more apparent because big NGOs, big movements, the well-known folks, they suffer with this all the time, but they're far more able to fabricate narratives where these things are simply not present, right? And we also should be careful with the negative disruptive effects of money. I have worked with many communities, activists, first-time grantees who have gotten money for the first time, and this has really disrupted their inner relationships, their assumptions, their beliefs. So we should always adapt the amount of funding, the pace of funding to what we are thinking and feeling that the community can use best. There is no sense in giving a 5-year pledge to a movement that has so far worked on a 5,000 reais, $1,000 per year basis, or something more than or less than that. So we always have to measure and try to understand the pace and the scale that those who are on the other side of the table are working with. What about from the outside in? So what are the practices, the external practices that we might want to use? And please, this is not an exhaustive, extensive list by any means. I'm just highlighting some of the things here, but a lot more could be said. So from the outside in, I am always encouraging more NGOs and CSOs to re-grant, and for funders to encourage their grantees to re-grant. Why? Because each CSO, each NGO has a network of its own. And sometimes these networks are inaccessible for donors, but they're very much accessible for the NGO, for that CSO. So it's easy for them to be able to reach these networks with some cash in addition to the capacity strengthening, the network building, and more. It's all sometimes, depending on which organization you're working with, it's also a way to circumvent bureaucracy, because many CSOs have legal and financial mechanisms to re-grant that are far more accessible and far more workable than some big funds and foundations. I have worked in many CSOs that started to re-grant. I've also consulted for CSOs that wanted to start to re-grant, and I have not seen negative experiences so far. There's lots of lessons to be taken from it, but it's something that I think we should continue doing. And if we have a more hybrid environment in, say, 5 years, where CSOs are working more in a hybrid manner, where they implement programs and also fund programs of partners, we might have a more decentralized funding landscape. I have been personally looking a lot for inspiration in UBI schemes, cash transfer schemes, universal basic income. Why? Because they actually, they touch on many inner assumptions that we have, that money, when made accessible and flexible, corrupts people, that people don't want to work anymore, that money should not be universal. I think UBIs are very interesting because they are universal, because they are basic, and because they are income. Income means that it will continue to flow. Income should be steady. Basic, because it might not fulfill all of the needs. People have to go out and self-govern and self-manage to meet some of their needs on their own, but we offer the basics. And universal, because we should start to pick and choose less who gets the money, and we should scrutinize less those who receive funds. We should meet people where they are. This can mean many things. For me personally, it has meant to create creative, flexible methodologies for people to actually access funding. For instance, between 2018 and 2021, I managed a re-grant program for the sex worker community in the southeast of Brazil, in the Belo Horizonte area. So the sex workers, they wanted to continue to do their work with dignity, and there was an emerging movement coming about. Many of these women were illiterate, or they were functionally illiterate. So there was no sense in asking them to submit written proposals to get re-grants from us. I was working at a different organization at the time, not Oak Foundation. So, okay, written proposals made no sense. So what did we ask for? In lieu of written proposals, we asked for WhatsApp audio messages, which was the means that they used the most to communicate and convey ideas. So they submitted grant proposals through WhatsApp voice messages. They submitted their reports through WhatsApp voice messages. And the final convening, which was in the midst of the pandemic, was also a WhatsApp event. So we opened a temporary WhatsApp group where each of the collectives of the sex workers had 30 minutes to present their work, throwing videos and files and messages in the group. And then came another, and then came another. And in the end, we all had a WhatsAppaço, a big message flood in the group to celebrate. So meet people where they are. If your group is not comfortable with written language, if they're not comfortable with bureaucracy, if they're not comfortable with the usual formats of open calls, of application forms, just remix those practices and meet people where they are. I have a few examples for you later. And like I said earlier, I always use the word support rather than funding, because we should think of funding and network building and capacity strengthening as one big support bundle. Oftentimes, funders cannot take responsibility for all of these on their own or at once. So partnering to do this kind of work will always work well when you're not able to do it on your own. So going back, it's really important to me to give examples of how this has been done so far. And I'll shut up very soon and listen to you all, but a few examples of how this has been done in different ways. So one example here is an open call that is open right now, actually, called Elas Periféricas by the Chidi Setúbal Foundation. So this is an open call for Black women who are leaders of collectives, movements, emerging organizations to get small grants and also support with network building. Here to the right side, I'm actually part of the selection committee of a very small fund called the Guru Fund, the Get Up, Rise Up Fund, which is a small fund for direct actions. We mostly fund Africa and Asia. Activist groups that are non-registered, they can apply anytime, and within a month, we will give them an answer and the money if they've been approved. And we call ourselves a rapid action fund rather than a rapid response fund, because a rapid response fund usually responds to emergencies, to problems, to stuff that we have to fix. And rapid action funds, they encourage the proactive agency of movements thinking ahead for solutions, thinking ahead to do actions on the ground. And this is a fund that allows activists to take some risks because the organization giving the grants, which is Beautiful Trouble, takes co-responsibility for what is done. They mentor the actions, they offer technical support, and the lessons from the funded projects are they feed back into the Beautiful Trouble platform, which is a creative activism platform that you can find online. This is a very small example down here, a rapid response fund by the Democracy Fund that offered $10,000 for all of their existing grantees, no application or reporting required. These are two initiatives that I have worked with personally. Here on the left side, this is actually an example of the sex worker program, support program that I ran when I was at another organization called Escola de Ativismo, the School of Activism. So this is the announcement for our first open call. It says here that people can send a WhatsApp voice message with the answers of the application form. And then here were the questions for the application form. To the right side, there was the Recife Peripheries open call that the School of Activism did in 2020. It was nicknamed Audital to play, it's a word play with the word open call, edital in Portuguese, because Audital actually meant that most of the processes were also done through audios and voice messages, from the applications to the reports, all done through WhatsApp. These are different mechanisms. So there's the small stipends program that Agência Pública, a big independent news outlet in Brazil, has offered to journalists since 2014. So every year or so, they launch an open call with a specific issue, and they invite journalists to apply to receive small stipends to write articles on that specific issue. So they have done this so far for access to internet, mining, corruption, state violence, mobility, hunger. So journalists are able to write articles funded by this organization through small scale funding, and they get the visibility from it. Very different example to the right, the different places in the world where universal basic income has been tried. This is actually not an extensive mapping. There are more today. But this is just to show that we have different local and national examples of ways to transfer cash in a universal way, no questions asked, and see the positive results later. Of course, the body of evidence for UBI is still very small, but the research that has been done so far and the experiences that have begun in this newer way that also involves private philanthropy from 2010 onwards shows that usually most of our fears about UBI, they don't actually stand. So there is no disruption to the labor force. People don't stop looking for work. They don't stop looking for other sources of income. So nothing too bad happens when we give people and communities cash, no questions asked. This to the left is an example that I also participated in. It was a small action fund for urban mobility activists in 2018. So bike activists in Brazil held an event in 2017, and they had a small surplus from that event. So they used that cash in excess to launch a small open call in the following year that supported small initiatives for urban mobility in the Sao Paulo area with, I think, up to 5,000 reais per group. This is currently $1,000. This is a newer example. So Purpose has recently launched a capacity strengthening and funding program that funds both campaigns and core costs of small movements, communities, organizations in the Amazon. This is a program called YADA. It can be found online. And finally, one example that we have here, the many calls launched by Fundo Casa, which have reached, I think, hundreds, Amalia can say the numbers, but probably close to 1,000, I think, different communities, groups across Brazil working with the forests, the rivers, the cities. Amalia, you had to open your mic.
It's about 500 grants a year for the last 3 years, hoping to increase.
So Casa is an example at a completely different scale from the other examples that I showed you, but we always have to go back to the drops in the ocean image. So different initiatives can happen at different scales, but we should never doubt the impact that an initiative can make because of its size. Because the way that we usually think about making change and about human systems is that things have to be all embracing, they have to be overarching, they have to be systemic. But if we look at, and if we foster more different local programs, local initiatives for local communities who can self-govern, then we will look at a different funding and capacity strengthening landscape in years to come. Finally, there's a lot that could be said about this, but for now, I could highlight two things that I think we need to get better at when we're trying to do small scale support. First, I think there's a huge gap for those that are able to access small grants at first, and then eventually want to move on to larger grants. So I have mentored many groups who have received grants from Fundo Casa, Fundo Elas, Fundo Baobá, Global Green Grants Fund. And then after 1, 2, 3 times getting small grants, they have developed some institutional capacity to migrate to larger forms of support, but they don't really find the sources. And they're stuck in that limbo somewhere between Fundo Casa, for instance, and the Oak Foundation, on the other hand. And there's very little sources that I can direct them to in these cases. So more opportunities to fund and support those who are transitioning from small to medium and large grants, they need to be around. And predictability. So for instance, this leader that I was talking to just this morning, the community leader from Recife, that community actually got a few grants in the past 3 years or so, small grants from different sources, Fundo Casa, Greenpeace, the School of Activism, which I used to work for, and other different opportunities. But the thing is, they can't really find any predictability. These are always short-lived grants, and none of their partners so far have actually asked them the question, what do you need to be able to take a breath for 2, 3, 4 years to come, rather than think, what are we going to do next month? how are we going to make it next year? So we need to tweak the ways that we are doing small scale support to give groups some predictability. And that does not necessarily mean that we have to move from a small to a large scale. It's just changing the methodologies and the way that we structure these support programs. So for you all, I had told you that I would shut up soon. For you all, I wanted first to ask some questions, and I prepared, I hope I can make this work. I have prepared a Mentimeter for you all. Just give me 1 second. Let me see how I can share this. Here we go. So if you can all go visit this link, you will find, I hope this works, you will find 2 questions in the Mentimeter. They are anonymous, and I would like you to take the next minute to answer both of them, and then we can see the responses together in a minute or so. So this is what we have so far. A good chunk of our group today has worked in initiatives that have done or do funding for small groups. About 5 of us don't know much about it. About the same amount of us have heard, read, or learned something about it. Were you all able to reach the next question? No? Let me see what I have to do.
I was able to reach it.
Yeah? Okay.
I just got to the second one as well.
It just worked
It worked? Great.
just now.
So this is what we have so far. No skeptics have come out of the closet yet. And apparently the majority of us are very enthusiastic about funding and support for small groups. Now, and these are some other questions that I have for you all. I would very much like to listen to you. Don't be shy. But if we were to speak with the voice of the skeptics, what will we say? If you were someone here who is a skeptic, who does not believe in supporting the grassroots, the small movements, the non-registered collectives, what would be some of your arguments? You can type in the chat, but please go ahead and open your mic if you want to.
I'll be happy to share one that I hear all the time.
Please go ahead, John.
I didn't introduce myself, and Jonah always tells us to. My name is John Bruno. I'm the Executive Director of the International Ecotourism Society. So when I'm, as I do all the time, working on securing capital for projects in small countries with small villages, small communities, indigenous communities, I'm always told that there isn't the capacity, that the funds will be misused, that there aren't models for risk management, that most projects are unsuccessful, that property rights are difficult to understand and will and the way communities are structured and managed will wind up destroying the goals of the project. So I could go on for another 30 minutes, but those are the main ones. In general, skepticism about the ability of small communities to manage funds, which I can assure you is absurd.
Thanks so much, John. And I see that Marcelo also wrote in the chat that transparency might be questioned. What else? What else do we have? What else have you heard? What else can you think of?
I have one. Well, we hear all the doubt that actually multiple small grants actually make any difference. In the theory or the illusion that it's putting a lot of money in some very specific, very good in communications organizations actually will solve the problem, when it's exactly the opposite. But so that's been the big struggle for us for so many years, but it looks like it's actually changing. There's hope in the horizon. We are understanding it lately that funders are beginning to understand the whole thing. So it has been a long standing question, but somehow we can see that there's a turning of the wave, of the wave.
I can also share. Hello, my name is Gabriela from Impactia, and maybe this is complementary to Amalia and the other colleagues previous to her. Well, we in Impactia, we also help financiers find the projects, and we do offer a set of strengthening so that the project implementers become stronger while they are also implementing the money. But some things that we have heard is, if you become more professional to be a project implementer, you lose part of your mission, or you become less political because you're dedicating your structure to be more administrative. And so you are to lose part of your politics approach. That's some things that we have heard. And also that there is a lot of concurrence, competencia, no? Concurrence within organizations to have access to the funds. That's something that we can work on as well.
Something that I imagine a lot of it revolves around trust. And then also kind of like likes with likes. And so a lot of philanthropy is being given from centralized wealth holders. And so wanting to give to other centralized organizations, and that often plays into large NGOs, et cetera. So I imagine a lot of it's just comfort and like the mirrors. It's more comfortable to look at ourselves as we are. Yeah, so trust and what's familiar.
Thanks so much, everyone. Anything else? And there's a ton of stuff in the chat too. Thanks to everyone who wrote in the chat. Could go on and on, huh? Marianne? We can't hear you. I can't hear you at least.
Sorry, double mute. Thank you for the presentation. I think this is great, and I have one that maybe Fundo Casa can also speak to, which is when organizations don't have all of their institutional pieces in place to be able to receive or execute funds. That can be a huge barrier that can actually cause them a lot of harm. We've seen a lot of criminalization of organizations in Brazil for small bureaucratic issues that they don't have all set. And I know that when I was at Moore, that was a big concern for us, because we didn't have the capacity as a large foundation to work on that with organizations. We depended on people like the amazing team at Fundo Casa to do that. And we also didn't have it within our funding mandate necessarily to be able to put support for those types of, for that kind of change. So maybe this is something where funders working together can help give the organizations the support that they need to get those types of institutional structures in place to be able to receive funds. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you. I'll address that in a minute. Just let me check. Thank you, Marianne. Let me check if anybody else wants to speak. Great. I could add one more. I think there's literally hundreds that we could be here for hours and hours. I could add one more that I've heard often, which is, well, small communities, grassroots groups, they can easily become overly reliant or dependent on our funding. And then we have to keep funding them again and again and again because they will not secure other sources. And then there's people in the chat here talking about, well, these people cannot ask for grants bigger than their own annual budget. What will success, return on investment look like? Ursula says it's hard to evaluate the results or outcome. Equality of opportunities for accessing the funds, transaction costs. What about growth? What about economic development? We cannot trust that they will use the funds properly. Their projects are not well written. Yes, this is one that I hear a lot as well. Well, if we fund these groups, they will use most of the funds for immediate survival needs and nothing will go to the change making, right? And then there are many responses that we could give, right? The admin costs. Well, if you get grants as a small organization or grassroots group and you become more professionalized, you will generate more admin costs and you will lose the vitality and the essence of a grassroots movement. But funnily, we are okay with heavy admin costs when we fund big NGOs. We are usually also okay with the admin costs of our own organizations, even the admin costs that pay for our own salaries oftentimes. Reliance, dependency, well, that is a structural issue that we should take a responsibility to address, right? If we foster more decentralized, flexible, accessible, timely opportunities for funding, we might not end up with grassroots groups that do become overly reliant on our own funding opportunities. And then Marianne talked about the institutional structure of these folks that we have been talking about in this session. What about the institutional structure for them to receive and manage money? Well, speaking from my personal point of view, I have encouraged and worked in organizations that have expanded their fiscal sponsorship practices. And I have also tried to foster organizations that come about just to work as fiscal sponsors, as incubators for those who do not want to be registered. For instance, this community movement that I was talking to this morning, they don't want to become registered because in their thinking, they do not want to lose their essence, their vitality of being a non-registered community movement, an autonomous movement. But what if there were more fiscal sponsors out there that could maybe house these people and could put their administrative structures to the service of small groups that are getting funding opportunities? What if they support these groups with accounting, with financial controls, with audits, with managing the funds, with making payments, making the disbursements, with liaising with the donors? There are different organizations today that operate as fiscal sponsors, and there are many NGOs that have been forced to work as fiscal sponsors because in their own fields and ecosystems, there are so many non-formalized partners or organizations that are still too small to be taken seriously by the big funders. So I think there are more views, probably more in this group as well, but I would for now highlight the issue of fiscal sponsorship and trying to decentralize that as well. And then Amalia says that CASA has been producing information, evaluations, and analysis that demonstrate the real impact of outscaling, which is a great word, funding to the grassroots, along with capacity building. If we think about, now let's move to the other side. If we were to actually make a case for small scale support to the grassroots, what could we say, for instance? What lived experiences, what arguments, what thoughts, what feelings will we have to make a case for that? Amalia.
Oh, well, I've been training for a long time. But anyway, I think that there are some specific things that are always out of these conversations, right? That we're talking here about changing the systems of social exclusion and vulnerability. Mainly if we're talking about environmental, destruction and how what we've seen so far, for many years is huge investments in a handful of very large organizations promising to save all of our important biomes like the Amazon. And what do we have? It's always worse. It's been getting worse and worse and worse. So it should be obvious that this doesn't work. On the contrary, now we have actually data for at least 20 years of combined small granting structures like the one that you put out there, putting people first. That's a global study that we participated, but there are many others. If you look at this link that I sent, we actually have been making efforts, not just CASA, but the Human Rights Fund, the Baobab Fund, the Ellis Fund, actually producing evidence that you only protect these places if you invest in as many communities as possible in two main ways, two main aspects. So rights defense is a huge situation because the violence only grows and the vulnerability grows with it. So there's a lot of territories under threat, and we hear that every day on the news. So this is one way, and there's a very specific way of resourcing these kinds of territorial protection that it would take another whole call. But then there's the other aspect, which is groups that have territories but don't have any means to improve their livelihoods and their income, and those are very quick turnaround grants. You make 1 or 2 grants because then they generate income themselves. So it's not about perpetuating dependency on us. So and those are quite impressive results, very fast. So there are many ways that. So now we actually have evidence, we have studies, we have numbers, and this is the kind of thing that I think we should push out there, because it is an evidence that needs to be understood, that it's not, because it's not the mainstream, but sometime it has to become, because otherwise it's not going to happen. The only way to produce democracy, strengthen democracy, is to invest in the people who are outside, who are excluded from benefits. And once they have, the turnaround is extremely fast, and we already have a lot of evidence. So people need to study that.
I just want to point out that we're very close to the top of the hour, so if the following commenters can go quick.
I'll be really quick and just name the ripple of impact. It's like the photos that you showed with the water drops. It's just, there's a lot more bang for your buck regarding ripple of impact and the both efficiency and efficacy. And while that does take a bit more, at least in our experience, on the relational side. That's something that we also very much enjoy, feeling closer to where these dollars, these resources, this energy is flowing to.
Sally, you had your hand up?
Yeah, yeah. I think very quickly, I think there could be basic concepts that could expedite processes of supporting small communities, and those basic concepts being historical facts or achievements, and maybe legitimacy that could be inferred to who are the people that are asking for the grants, or who are the people that we're assessing if we're going to give those grants. If they don't have to write good pieces, and they don't have to have a clear mind of what to do with it, but if they have done good things, if they have the support of their communities for a long time, and in others that could be easily assessed, like Maria said, Amalia said, about the evidence that there is about their work, that should be enough, and could be the basis to analyze it about the grants giving.
Great. I would definitely echo that. And I think that there is much more that we could say. I hope we can honor these thoughts that we did not have time to share, and just stay with them for the week to come, and hopefully for the year to come. It's an election year in Brazil, lots to be done. And I hope you all find inspiration to reinvent and revisit your practices. My email is in the chat. Please do reach out whenever you want to talk about this. I know that there is a question here from, Marcio. I'm sorry we won't have time to discuss, but do reach out. I would love to talk more about this with you all. So thanks so much for sharing this space, and it was really good to hear you all. Jonah, back to you.
Great. Carolina, are you able to stay on for another 5 or 10 minutes yourself?
Yes.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So everybody, this is where we switch over to unstructured water cooler time. Class is dismissed. It's an unstructured call. Some people take the mic for shameless self-promotion. There are more conversations with Carolina. The chat will stay open. It's, everyone is invited to post your LinkedIn, your email addresses, your, the websites to your organizations. There's an amazing group of people who've come together around this call. So have at it, all of you. Carolina, thank you so much. It was a fascinating call.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Any questions, follow up, anybody, feel free.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia. I was on the call by phone, but I couldn't figure out how to take myself off of mute. So I thought I'd jump in now. But one of the thoughts that I had when you were asking for the skeptics sort of point of view that I've heard before is around subgrants. And so I've heard a lot of people say, why can't the smaller grassroots, get their funding from the subgrants, because then they're under the auspices of the NGOs that do have the management capacity. And so what would you say in response to that argument?
I would say that it depends on the regranter. In fact, there are those that do use the opportunity to exercise control and that do restrict the space in which the final recipients can actually work and invent and self-organize, especially. But I think it is also a role of those making donations and grants and investment to regranters to help shape those regranters in a way that these practices are changed. I concur with the argument. Oftentimes, Alicia, I have seen that happen. And I have been in situations where I have worked for regranters where I have seen myself do it also. So I think it's just something that we have to take co-responsibility for and admit that there's still lots to be improved with regards to regrant. And there are also many great examples out there that we can try to replicate more often.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great answer because I've also seen both the success stories and then the times where the, bigger organizations will take that opportunity to just kind of have their way, I guess. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have one question, which is about getting the big aid agencies and governments involved in small level grant making. I guess it's a two-part question. One, have you seen that? And second, how is this wisdom of small grant making expressing itself through the Oak Foundation?
Yeah. So in the first case, I have seen organizations that do part of their funding bundle is aid agencies and governments, and they also have re-grants programs. I don't know to which extent these funds were exactly used in the re-grants programs. I know it depends on what kind of government funding you're referring to. With embassies, for instance, there are cases out there of funding from, the Dutch embassy, for instance, being used for re-grants. I would not have much to say about that because that is not usually the world that I circulate in, but I'd be happy to listen to more experiences here. About the Oak Foundation, which is something, this is an important question. So Oak has been more empathetic and enthusiastic about working with intermediaries. That is the language that we use so far inside the foundation. This is mostly not because of an ethical or theory of change motivation, but mostly an operational motivation, which is it's much easier for a large foundation to present one grant proposal to our trustees, to an intermediary who will then take care of business from then on, than to present many different grant proposals for all of the end recipients. That does not mean that by working with intermediaries, we are necessarily reaching the grassroots. Sometimes quite the contrary, but I think that there is an effort on the part of Oak, and I see this with other more traditional family foundations as well, to try and really question who is actually getting the money that we are putting out and how can we support new intermediaries that are maybe closer to the grassroots. By new, I don't mean that they are new in time, but they're new partners, perhaps. We have partnered through the Brazil program with Fundo Casa for many years, and there have been other attempts to do similar partnerships in other programs as well, in addition to the Brazil program.
I just want to point out one more that I remembered, the famous, you need to get us a letter of inquiry from the relevant minister, the Minister of Finance, and one other minister. These three never work together for anything, but you go get that letter and we'll be happy to consider your funding request.
Right. Easy.
Right.
And I think that there was a conversation just starting to pop up in the chat about the alternatives to call for proposals. What other ways can we use to reach those that we want to reach? I have experimented, for instance, I'm sure there are examples here in the group, but I have experimented with different models where we start with a call for proposals. And then the recipients of their first round, in the second round, get to nominate 2 or 3 local partners that they would like to receive the funds as well. And we go through a network expansion process where each of the grantees are co-responsible for expanding that network. There's also programs in which, for instance, the participants of an event get a grant. We look at those who have participated in a convening. I have been a part of these experiences as well. Activist convenings, for instance, where later in the game, one organization actually gives grants to those participants because they form an emerging network. We can also combine different mechanisms to do group support and individual support. So for instance, we can do open calls for individual leaders and later in the game support their organizations as well, or the other way around. So there are many different ways to go about this that I have seen and experienced at least. And I would encourage people to invent more, because I think we are still quite limited in the way that we reach people. We also usually forget about the traditional offline tactics, right? So how do we reach low bandwidth communities who, they use other means of communication in addition to the internet? So how do we find the local businesses, the churches, the local leaders who can help and promote an open call, for instance? We did that with the sex worker movement in Belo Horizonte. It's a very territorialized community. So we identified the main businesses, cultural spaces, restaurants where the women used to go. And we just gave out pamphlets in those areas. And that allowed us to reach many women who were not part of the movements already, who actually didn't even know that they could apply for something like this.
Have there been experiences of mixing a small grant program with a later online crowdfunding program, sort of as a model to segue from, small to more formalized with a more diverse array of supporters?
You mean crowdsourced programs?
Crowd fundraising. So
yeah. Well, I have, with the School of Activism, we did one edition of our small grants program where we matched funds. So it was part crowdsourced and part matched funds that we gave. So we combined the crowdfunding campaigns with our own funding. And there are many organizations who have gotten small seed grants from small funding programs that just took advantage of the visibility that they could produce with those initial resources to go and capitalize on that through crowdfunding campaigns later. I could think of many examples, and also projects. This is also one thing, projects within NGOs that are not exactly supported by the executive board or the advisory board, and that just need an autonomous opportunity to pop up. There's a project called, for instance, Mapa do Acolhimento. It's a project at Nossas, so it's a big, well-known NGO, to support women who have suffered domestic violence. This was a project that emerged against the odds of the advisory and executive board at the time, and they started with a small grant and later led an autonomous crowdfunding campaign, and now it's on the verge of becoming a spin-off organization from NASA. So there are many trajectories out there. You all probably have more examples.
I have another question about re-granters in the Amazon and outside of Brazil. So I believe that Fundo Casa supports a lot in Brazil, but also beyond Amazonians beyond Brazil. Is that the case, Amalia? And I know that when you're sending funding from Brazil to the outside, like to the United States, there's the central bank takes a giant tax off the top. So I'm just wondering about the legal infrastructure for other non-Brazilian Amazonian countries, whether the re-grant infrastructure exists for small funding programs that some of the larger international funders might be able to play with.
That's been our job in the last 6 years, actually. We were able to make grants across the region up until December 2018, when the taxes were raised. So before that, it was possible. We made 3,000 grants in 10 countries between 2005 and but before that stopped, we actually were already working with activists inside each country to set up a funding disbursement structure based on our experience and the design. And we actually now have 4 new funds operating with their own funding already in Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, and even in Mozambique. So together with these new funds and the older ones in Mexico, Central America, here, and Southeast Asia, we just launched the Alliance of Southern Funds. It's the Global South Alliance of Socio-Environmental Funds. We're 9 funds now. So the idea is actually exactly what Carol was saying earlier. it's better to have disbursement structures in the communities, as close to the communities as possible, inside the country, managing resources in local currencies, and that can respond within the local culture, because that's the only way to access groups that are invisible, and it's impossible for any other structure except for local structures to access, which is where you make it you make access to resources more horizontal, and the principle of outscaling. So yeah, Casa doesn't have to do it anymore. We just helped others to set up, and they're doing it now. And actually, it's Bolivia now that is taking over the regranting in the rest of South America, and the countries where the local funds don't exist.
Go Bolivia. You don't hear that often.
So Jonah and everyone, I do have to hop off now because I have a 4:30 meeting that is in a different neighborhood, so I have to get going. But this has been really, really great and exciting to talk to you all.
Thank you so much for your time. It was amazing.
Oh, and it's your request, right? To include the link to the Southern Alliance. I think Amalia can provide that.
Okay, great.
So to everyone, here's my email again, and please feel free to reach out. And a great week for all of us. All the best.
Thank you so much.
Ciao.
I'll send you that later because we're just building the website. So
Okay.
send it to you on email. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Great.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, bye-bye.